These kinds of connoisseur issues would have been foreign to America's first whiskey distillers, the colonists. They made whiskey for the most practical of reasons, to prevent their excess grains from spoiling.
It also concentrates the grain. I mean, it makes it easier to transport when you turn it into whiskey. And it got to the point where whiskey was actually like currency.
The unregulated whiskey trade flourished until 1791, when the new federal government decided to tax it to pay the debt for the Revolutionary War. Farmers revolted against the tax, turning the excise men away by force.
In 1794, George Washington actually had to send out the militia, the troops, to quell the uprising, and he actually sent out more troops to stop the Whiskey Rebellion than he needed to actually defeat the British. And ironically, just 3 years after the Whiskey Rebellion, George Washington decided to make his own whiskey in Mount Vernon. And by 1799, in the year that George Washington died, he was the largest distiller in the United States.
At this same time, in the neighboring state of Kentucky, Jim Beam was getting its start. In the bourbon category, no brand sells more.
My family started making whiskey in 1795. Jacob Beam made his first barrel of whiskey in 1795 and sold it. He started our family in this business. 7 generations later, here I am.
The company bears the name of Fred Noe's great-grandfather.
Jim Beam was the 4th generation, and he was the one who got us back on the map after Prohibition.
The distillery can be found in Claremont, Kentucky, where faith and whiskey manage to keep company, and tradition means maintaining a culture, literally.
Okay, we're going into our jug yeast cooler room right now. This is where we're keeping our strain of jug yeast that's been around since Prohibition. How we do this is we keep our original strain and we inoculate our new formula with it. We make our new jug yeast each time, and that keeps our strain alive.
This yeast is the engine of the distillery. It produces every drop of alcohol that becomes bourbon. Quality control begins as the grain arrives at the distillery. Incoming corn must pass a battery of tests.
It can't be over 14% moisture. Bushel weight, it's got to be at least 54 pounds a bushel. It can't have aflatoxin in it.
Aflatoxin is a toxin produced by molds on grain that, if present, would glow under this ultraviolet light. In addition to being toxic, it affects the taste of the whiskey. The grains must be mostly whole and not broken into so-called fines. Once a grain has passed inspection, it's moved into massive bins.
These are holding bins where we run our grains from the holding bins into the house as needed.
From above, the distillery looks like a small city, a huge industrial undertaking. But for Fred Noe, bourbon is all about family.
You kind of have to be part artist, part scientist. And I think my dad, Booker Noe, was probably the best there ever was at making bourbon.
Booker also anticipated the growth potential in the high-end bourbons, the so-called ultra-premiums. Higher proof, more mature, more expensive whiskeys.
Dad released his Booker's bourbon in 1987, and that's what got the whole ultra-premium line started for the whole bourbon industry. His Booker's bourbon broke the $50 barrier on a bottle of bourbon. Is bottled straight from the barrel, uncut, unfiltered, the way bourbon was 100 years ago. For people to sip and savor. I mean, that's what the thing about these bourbons. It takes us 7, 8, 9, 10 years to make it.
Beam makes 4 ultra premiums: Basil Hayden's, Baker's, Booker's, and the best-selling ultra premium bourbon in the world, Knob Creek.
This one's named for a little area down the road where Abraham Lincoln was born. Now, this bourbon stays in these barrels for 9 years.
So storage is an issue. Beam matures 1,800,000 barrels in 55 rack houses. The process of removing whiskey from the barrels, also known as dumping, takes place, not surprisingly, in the dump room.
He's pulling the bung out of the barrel. What that does, that enables us to put the vent tube in the barrel so we can get the whiskey out. That whiskey's removed from the barrel and goes straight into the trough through the piping into a tank.
Once emptied, the barrels are sold. They can only be used once for bourbon.
We get done with these barrels, we sell a lot of them to our friends over in Scotland to make the Scotch. Scotch is okay because it's got some of my bourbon in the barrels we sell.
For Fred Noe, sampling bourbon straight out of the barrel is his favorite part of the job.
This is what we call a thief. This is how we steal a little drink of liquor out of these barrels. I just drop it in here. There's a hole on top. Put my thumb on it good and tight. And then I'll bring it out of here. And then I'll get a little shot of liquor. What I'm doing there is the Kentucky Chew. Put the bourbon in your mouth and chew on it a little bit. And what it does, it involves your entire mouth in the tasting.
For those who take their bourbon seriously, these are good times.
People are drinking less and they want to drink better. It's got the bourbon business rocking and rolling again.
While business is booming for distillers in the American South, an ocean away in the birthplace of whiskey, a liquid gold rush is going on as well. Jack Daniel's is sold in 135 countries worldwide, but you can't buy a shot of it where it's made. Lynchburg, Tennessee is in a dry county. Whiskey will return.